logo. Now Brian is going to look at the pros and cons between different types of programming languages in different contexts. And I would like to make a cautionary note when Brian is talking. I'm being a psychoanalyst here. When Brian says, I hate schools, he, by the way, portrays himself as a professional complainer, so we know that. When Brian says, I hate school or I dislike school, I dislike, what else was it? I dislike grades, I dislike curriculum. Please do think of this within the context that Gary just presented so well. This is the context of very frightening shifts within the American political forces that are trying to bring back our school systems into a path that we would like any school to be, and that are actually the first ones at bashing teachers at a time when, for the first time in history, the big universities of the same country deliver their contents for free. So please keep this in mind. We are in a very strange position. And the radical perspectives of people like Gary and Brian shouldn't be taken as we are against schools, they are good schools. We are against teachers. The most of the work is done with teachers, nor we never teach. Because I had the chance to be in the New Hampshire in the last workshop that Gary organized. There were mini tutorials there. People taught each other pieces of what they didn't know. And this remains important. So the word is to Brian Harvey now. Whatever happened to the revolution, which is a slightly different take than the one that we just heard, but I think they complement each other, and both are very insightful. Brian, it's yours.
Thank you.
Start complaining.
Okay. No, that's not what I'm doing at all. I'm complaining about, in this talk, I'm complaining about myself. But I have to say, I have to tell you, one time an interviewer asked Keith Richards, what's the worst mistake the Rolling Stones ever made? And he said, agreeing to go on after James Brown in the Tammy Show. You don't have to know what the Tammy Show is, you just have to know James Brown. And that's how I feel about going on after Gary. But, okay. So, in 1986, I posed the question, whatever happens to the revolution, in the call for papers for the Logo 86 conference at MIT. I wasn't happy with the answers people offered and offended some people, probably a few of them here, by saying so. So this talk is in part an apology, in which I recount my own failure to maintain the revolution. I start with a little bit of background and then confess my sins. This is my favorite Seymour Papert quote. It comes from a proposal for funding that he made to the National Science Foundation. And he didn't like the fact that the NSF required annual reports and site visits, and he said, let me find a school that will let me take charge and do what I want to do with kids for 5 years without any interference, and then after 5 years you come around and visit, and if any competent observer is tempted to apply statistical methods, declare the experiment a failure. Meaning, you know, it should be totally obvious at first glance, as you saw in Gary's clips, that something is happening that's very different from what had happened before. Needless to say, this proposal was not funded. Seymour learned, at least when talking to funding agencies, to be a little less inflammatory in his rhetoric. But still, Papert put logo firmly in the progressive camp of education, the one that says that education is for the learner, rather than, as in Plato, for example, for the benefit of society, to make good citizens out of people. And yet, logo accommodated to school pretty quickly. People started making logo curricula that showed how they match up with some curriculum standard that was in place, and did group A, group B experiments trying to prove that what they learned in logo transferred to something else, and so on. So that's the background, that we started out with this revolutionary vision, and pretty quickly, I think, seemed to lose it. The other piece of the background is technological. You all know about Scratch, so I won't say much about it. It's super successful and was designed, as Mitch told us the other day, for 8 to 14-year-olds, as a result of which they deliberately left out some things. So when I first saw Scratch 7 years ago, I said, what kind of programming language doesn't let me define procedures? Nevertheless, they dragged me kicking and screaming to the first Scratch conference. No doubt promptly regretted it because I started making trouble. Organizing a session in which I demonstrated some things you could do in Logo that you couldn't do in Scratch. In that room at that session was a German programmer named Jens Moenig, who went home and did it. He took Scratch and modified it a little bit and made build your own blocks, or BYOB. This is actually version 3. We at Berkeley wanted to use Jens's work in a course we were developing that I'm going to tell you more about in a bit. Just being able to make your own blocks wasn't good enough. I wanted first-class procedures and first-class lists. So you can see over at the right side of the screen a list of blocks. And this is something that isn't in Scratch, but every Scratch kid who sees that picture and who recognizes what a list looks like in Scratch and who recognizes what a block looks like in Scratch immediately understands that this is a picture of a list of blocks and just gets it. By the same brilliant visual metaphor by which kids understand that that C-shaped block with an arrow at the bottom means a loop, we can use the same ideas to express what everybody prior to that time thought of as way too hard to teach kids. And then teachers told us that they're not allowed to install software on their school computers. And could we have a browser-based version? So Jens rewrote it in JavaScript to run in a browser. And you'll notice, by the way, over on the right, that in this version, the default sprite costume is the logo turtle, something that traditionalists like me like. Sorry. It got a new name, Snap. BYOB, build your own blocks, sort of made it clear what the language was about and was funny to boot. Snap, if you Google it, the first thing you'll find is the US government food stamp program for feeding the poor. And the second thing you'll find is the support network for people abused by priests. And then finally you get to, the programming language. So, yeah, so why is it called that? Well, this is the first story I'm going to tell you about compromising with sin. What happened was that count them three, American teachers of kids complained to us that they didn't feel comfortable using with kids a piece of software called BYOB. For those of you who are not American, in the United States, not only are children not allowed to drink alcoholic beverages during their childhood, which is not uncommon in the world, they're not allowed to know that there's such a thing as alcoholic beverages. They think parties are brought by the stork, just like babies. And so when we got these complaints from these teachers, we had a crisis meeting at Berkeley of the people building our curriculum that used BYOB. And my colleague Dan Garcia said, we have to change the name. I said, what do you mean we have to change the name? This is Jens's software, not ours. He gets to say what it's called. And after a good bit of screaming back and forth, I managed to talk them down to, we have to ask Jens to change the name. And what I still don't quite understand is that somehow we turned into that it was my job to ask Jens to change the name. So I said to Jens something along the lines of, my idiot colleagues at Berkeley, because count them three teachers complained, would like you to change the name of this brilliantly named, funny, and descriptive software. I think you should tell them to shove it, but it's up to you. And Jens is a very gentle soul and does not like to be in the middle of political firestorms, said, I'll do whatever you want. And so that's why it's called SNAP. Okay. Now we get to the confessing my sins part. Probably every place in the world, not just the United States, there aren't enough women in computer programming, computer science, and at least in the United States, there aren't enough people of color in computing either. And to their credit, the National Science Foundation decided to do something about this and made the strategic decision to focus on high schools as the place to make a difference. To start with, I mean, they want to make a difference throughout the whole educational range, but starting in high school. And so they wanted to build a computer science course for non-geeks. A peculiarity of the American school system is that we don't have a national education authority the way many countries do. And so if you want to get a course into every high school in America, you have to talk to every local school district in America, of which there are several tens of thousands. Unless it's an AP course. AP stands for Advanced Placement. It's a program run by the College Board, a consortium of colleges. It offers exams at sort of college freshman level courses and various things. And I hate the AP program. It was different when I was a kid. When I was a kid, no, it was different. It really was different when I was a kid because the expectation was that you would take one, maybe two AP courses in the area that you're most interested in. So I was a math nut, and I took the math AP, which is a calculus course. Because that was how it worked back then, it wasn't a big imposition on kids' lives. Everybody in the class wanted to be there and was prepared to be there and was good at the subject. And so they were great classes. But what happened is that the AP courses have become another weapon in the college admissions wars. And if you want to go to a first-grade college, you have to take all 20-odd subjects that AP offers. Or at least you have to take all the ones that your high school offers. And we know that. Our admissions office has a database of what APs are offered by each high school in the state. This means that kids don't really want to be in those courses. And they're taking 4 or 5 at a time, which is not how they were designed. And the course workload is still based on the idea that you're only taking one of them. And as a result, we have a generation of teenagers seriously addicted to caffeine, usually in the form of frappuccinos. And many of whom are addicted to more serious stimulants, which they get from their friends who are officially hyperactive and are therefore prescribed things like Ritalin or Adderall. So this is a serious problem, and it's due to the AP, and I hate the whole business. But I found myself a few years ago a consultant to the College Board building this AP curriculum. Usually, the College Board assesses what colleges are teaching and then builds an exam around that. But this time, we were introducing a course that nobody was teaching, really. And so, for the first time ever, what they did was put together a committee of computer science professors to develop a curriculum framework, which is up on the screen here, based on 7 big ideas and 6 computational thinking practices. Now, the premise, remember, is that we're trying to get especially girls to take a computer science class. Girls, just like regular people, love computers in the form of cell phones and social networking and so on. But they are said to think that programmers live in cubby holes and never talk to another human being. And so there was a deliberate de-emphasis of programming in this curriculum. So the first of the big ideas is computing is a creative activity. Creative is the sort of girl-friendly word that they like. And it is, it's true. Computing is a creative activity. But the people who do computing don't sit around thinking about that. You know, it's only educators who think about computing being a creative activity. Programming comes in at number 5 out of 7. And you may think that programming is something you do, right? But no, it's only something you think about, because in the computational thinking practices, where you would expect to see programming at number 1, it's not there at all. Instead, we have number 2, developing computational artifacts. What on earth is a computational artifact? It sounds like, you know, something that was made by the Aztecs, 2,000 years ago. Well, it could be a computer program. Could be a computer program. But it could also be, say, a spreadsheet or a PowerPoint presentation. Those are computational artifacts too. So the idea was you would be able to take this class without doing any programming. So our view at Berkeley is that it may well be true that girls who haven't experienced it come in with a prejudice against programming. And every teacher knows you have to meet kids where they are. But you don't have to leave them where they are. In fact, you shouldn't. And so our version of the course, we were one of the initial 5 pilot sites. And everybody made their own version, completely different from each other. Our version was programming heavy. In particular, since I was one of the designers of it, it emphasizes functional programming, like the work that I've been doing all my life. Recursive functions and higher order functions, all that stuff is in our course. And we think that because of the visual metaphors that we learned from scratch, we can actually present those ideas in a way that girls can get, just like regular people. So that's our plan, and we want to take over the world. So taking over the world entails, what you're looking at here is the beginning of a proposal I wrote this past year to the National Science Foundation, who were offering $7.5 million 5-year grants for what's called a math-science partnership between universities and K-12 school systems. And $7.5 million sounds like a lot of money. It's not a lot of money when your university has a 50% overhead rate, and you're building a coalition with 4 partner institutions to divide up the money, and it's over 5 years. So, it's a nice thing to be competing for, and we think there's a good chance we're going to get it. The current state of this proposal is that the NSF program manager in charge of this particular solicitation has recommended us for funding. And now it's a question of all the recommended proposals, fighting it out, and how much budget the NSF actually has, and so on. So who knows? But I want to take over the world. I want to make everybody do things my way. And this is leading to a whole series of compromises. So, I hate grades. Do I have to convince you guys that grades are evil?
No.
Anybody not think that grades are evil? There's a mom. Oh, I hate grades. At Berkeley, where I teach undergraduates, our students are so terrified that they might get an A- that they really can't afford to take intellectual risks. In other words, they can't learn, because you can't learn when you're in that frame of mind. I think one of the important things about the kids we saw in Gary's presentation is that they weren't getting grades on their work, and so they got to do whatever appealed to them, whether it, used recursion or not, for example. But in this course, we give grades. And we're preparing kids to take this AB exam. The good news is that our grades are mostly project-based rather than test-based. So at least it's not a question of regurgitating facts, but rather doing a project of your own choice in pairs. We use pair programming in the course. So it's not as bad as it could be. But still, it's pretty bad. It's grades. So that's a compromise. As opposed to, for example, when I was a high school teacher. Amazingly, a high school once actually hired me to teach computer programming. And the very first thing I did when I got there was talk them into letting me not give grades. It made such a difference. You know, kids would actually tell me what they thought, for example. Anyway, but back then I wasn't trying to take over the world. I was just doing my little thing in my little classroom, and never mind anybody else. I hate curriculum. One of the things I have been doing lately is teaching Scratch in an after-school program in an elementary school. My way of teaching Scratch is first meeting, I spend about 3 minutes showing kids how to click one block into another block and showing them that there are 8 different menus with different colors. 10, I guess now. And then I say, you know, have at it. That's my curriculum. And then maybe 2 months later, I'll say, okay, today, put your project aside for a moment. I'd like you to do this challenge. And I'll, give them a challenge. And the kids always complain bitterly about this, but, they end up enjoying it once they get into it. And then they go back to their project. And I'll leave them alone for another couple of months. But there's a curriculum framework that we have to follow. Our curriculum is more demanding than what the College Board wants, quite a bit more demanding. And, we're making those demands on students. I guess partly I feel that after they leave our class, these kids are going to go on to take boring old computer science classes where they won't learn functional programming. And so if I don't inoculate them while I have them, it'll be too late. But there are things in our curriculum, in fact, that wouldn't be there if the College Board didn't insist. One of my favorite bad examples is binary. If there's one thing that everybody knows about computers, it's that they run on ones and zeros. But what's computer science about? Computer science is about abstraction. Even the College Board understands that. That was the first big idea, the second big idea, sorry, after creativity. And in particular, abstraction means making it possible for people to think about the problem they're trying to solve rather than about the limitations of computer circuitry. So nobody who does computer science spends their time mucking about with ones and zeros. They have higher level programming languages. So why is the ones and zeros in the curriculum? Well, because teachers like it, because they understand it, 1, 0. I get that. They don't mostly understand why computers use ones and zeros. Namely, that the way transistors work have an asymmetry to them, so that the output you get from a transistor goes up with positive voltages up to a cutoff point. But as the voltage gets smaller, it just gets to 0. It doesn't then go down to a negative cutoff voltage. So transistor circuitry is bistable. And that's why computers use ones and zeros. But we don't teach that. We just teach computers use ones and zeros. Unconnected with anything. It's like the classic disconnected curriculum idea. But it's in our course because it has to be, because there's a question about it on the AP test. I hate MOOCs. I don't hate MOOCs as much as some of these other things. I think if you're, you know, stuck in a rural village someplace, and heretofore you couldn't get an education at all, MOOCs can be a lifesaver. But I think especially with kids, the important thing that happens in education is human connections between students and between students and teachers. But we're making a MOOC for our course because that's one of the ways that we're going to get it into even the ones that can't afford a computer teacher. That's a minor. I hate schools. I really do. I hate schools. I don't know. Maybe it's true, as you guys were all yelling at me yesterday, that it's only American schools that are so bad.
Especially bad.
Yeah, American schools are certainly especially bad.
We have the internet now, though, it's spread contagion.
Yeah. But what kids learn in school is that they are irresponsible and helpless. Because if they weren't irresponsible, there wouldn't be all those rules about running in the hall and stuff. Putting chewing gum under the seats. And if they weren't helpless, they might have something to say about what they wanted to learn, or not. And that's true in the best of schools. I've seen some pretty good teaching in schools. Once in a while, I've seen some great teaching in schools. I have seen some spectacularly bad teaching in schools. But mostly what I see is kind of medium teaching by teachers who care, but are constrained by the institution that they work in. That's especially true in the US these days because teachers get raises or get fired based on how well the kids do in the standardized tests. So teachers are afraid, just like kids. School is an institution for generating fear. But I'm going to spend the next 4 years, if we get funded, going to 100 different New York City high schools and sitting in the back of the room taking notes about how the class was going. So that we can get functional programming out into the world. So, am I making the revolution? No, absolutely not. I can't help thinking that our curriculum is worthwhile, but I also can't help feeling that this is not the work I was called to do. When I first read all those 60s and 70s books by people like John Holt, Paul Goodman, and so on. So I hope we have time for discussion so that you can help me resolve this problem. Thank you.